On July 3, 1941, just 10 days after the largest military operation in history began, German General Halder wrote in his diary. He said it was no exaggeration to say the Red Army was already beaten and that the Soviet Union would surrender in days. But just 1 month later, on August 11th, Halder, the Chief of Staff of the German Army High Command, sang a very different tune. He wrote, "It is increasingly clear that we have underestimated the Russian colossus. At the start of the war, the Germans expected to face about 200 Soviet divisions. By August, they had already identified over 360. Halder noted that even though these new divisions were poorly equipped and led, they were still there. As soon as Germany destroyed a dozen, another 12 would instantly appear. The difference between these two diary entries is staggering. So, what on earth happened during that pivotal month of July 1941? That's exactly what we're about to uncover. On June 22, 1941, Germany's Army Group Center began its blitzkrieg towards Moscow. Capturing the capital was the main goal of Operation Barbarossa. The first few days were a string of stunning victories. Minsk had fallen, and the Red Army had already suffered over 300,000 casualties. The next logical step towards Moscow was the city of Smolensk, a critical communications hub. Taking it would place the German army just 350 kilometers from Moscow, putting the capital within striking distance. After crushing the Soviet divisions near the border, the Germans expected a relatively easy advance. As we're about to see, they were dead wrong. The German plan for Smolensk was a classic pincer movement. Hermannhoth's 3rd Panzer Army would attack from the north. Combined, they had about 400,000 men and 1,000 tanks, supported by over a dozen infantry divisions. On the other side, the Red Army, despite catastrophic losses, was scrambling to reorganize. He managed to muster 13 armies, a mix of retreating units and fresh reinforcements, totaling around 550,000 soldiers and 1,500 tanks. The battle ignited on July 10th. Hoth and Guderian's panzer armies attacked simultaneously, smashing through the weak Soviet defenses with ease. Many of Timoshenko's forces were still on their way, and the units holding the line were already battered from previous fighting. This initial assault was almost entirely carried out by the panzer divisions. Why? Because the German infantry couldn't keep up. The tanks had advanced so rapidly that the foot soldiers were left far behind. General Heinrici, who would later famously defend the Silo Heights, was there. We marched between 30 and 35 kilometers a day, and although the horses have a lot of difficulty on the sandy roads, we must continue. 3 days later, with the battle raging, he wrote again. Yesterday. 47. To do it once is possible, but to do it after numerous marches of 30 to 40 kilometers is a tremendous thing. No one sleeps at night. So, as the German infantry and Soviet reinforcements both rushed towards Smolensk, the panzers had already punched deep into enemy territory. They had created a large salient west of Smolensk, trapping for Soviet armies. Further south, another attack pinned 2 more Soviet armies near Mogilev. But the delay in their arrival meant the panzers couldn't advance as quickly as planned. Still, on July 12th and 13th, the offensive resumed. Smolensk was nearly surrounded, with only a narrow corridor to the northeast remaining open. But this was also when Soviet reinforcements finally started arriving in force. They established new defensive lines along the Vopi River, to the north and southwest of Yeltsin. In total, 5 large Soviet armies, each with about 50,000 men, dug in east of Smolensk. By July 15th and 16th, the German front was chaotic. Units were fighting in isolation with little coordination. As the infantry slowly trickled in, the panzer and motorized divisions kept attacking, hoping to break the Soviet will to resist. Smolensk, remained stubbornly uncircled, and Soviet resistance was stiffening. Between July 16th and 19th, most of the German infantry finally reached the front lines. After dealing with a few isolated Soviet pockets, they began to solidify the front. This coincided with a massive Soviet all the armies concentrated east of the Vope River were thrown against the Germans. The attack was contained, but it helped forge a solid, shaped front line around Smolensk. It was during this intense fighting, on July 16th, that Hitler issued Directive 33, one of the most consequential orders of the entire war. This was a moment of extreme tension for Hath and their commander, von Bock. They were furious at the idea of diverting from their primary objective, Moscow. From July 20th to the 22nd, the Soviets launched a series of counterattacks along the entire front, but failed to achieve a breakthrough. It's important to remember that many of these Soviet troops were hastily mobilized and had very little combat experience. The Germans, for their part, kept up the pressure. By July 27th, they had finally, completely encircled Smolensk. They also pushed further east, capturing the city of Yelnya. After a few failed rescue attempts by Rokossovsky, the Soviet garrison in Smolensk surrendered on August 5th. The Red Army suffered nearly 450,000 casualties, including dead, wounded, and prisoners. The Germans lost around 100,000 men, but the fighting was far from over. Soon, the terrible Battle of Yelnya would begin with even worse results for the Germans. But that's a story for another time. So, what were the consequences of this brutal battle? First, it proved to the Germans the incredible resilience of the Red Army. It could absorb catastrophic losses and still launch massive counterattacks. Second, this was the moment the decision was made to halt the advance on Moscow. The divisions of Army Group Center were diverted to other operations. While these operations would lead to the capture of hundreds of thousands more Soviet soldiers, it ultimately wasn't enough to cause the collapse of the Red Army. You can hear the desperation creeping into his tone. When enemy units are destroyed, the Soviets send new troops to the front and attack again. How the Russians get it is beyond my knowledge. In the meantime, we barely receive a replacement. What a wonderful prospect. What do you think? Was the Battle of Smolensk one of the key turning points of Operation Barbarossa? Should the Germans have pushed on towards Moscow instead of diverting their forces? Let me know in the comments. We'll continue this series soon with the huge Battle of Yelnya. Thank you all so much for being part of this community, especially our patrons who make these videos possible. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe and share the video. We'll see you, as always, every Thursday and Sunday. See you soon.